let's talk about the most controversial songs of all time. We'll go down a list and we'll ask ourselves, what was it all about? Was the controversy worth it? Was it all overblown? Was it just a bunch of pearl clutching? Or in hindsight, did they have a point? We'll find out. We'll see. And in the end, we'll remember to always cultivate a supportive environment, prepare thoroughly, think through the teacher's stance, select authentic issues, choose resources and pedagogies, and guide discussion, because that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to help you help yourself. And so today we'll take a look at some controversial songs, and I will guide the discussion. I will guide the discussion with tools for analyzing sources, exchanging ideas, moving from small groups to whole group, and attending to equity. Okay? Attending to equity, that's my specialty. And really quickly, I also wanted to mention my Patreon. If you like what I do on YouTube and everywhere else, joining my Patreon really helps me do this full time and worry less about videos getting demonetized by YouTube or copyright claimed by labels. Patrons get all my podcasts and main channel videos early. There are members only channels in my Discord that I'm super active in. I also do giveaways. For example, I've been giving away a lot of Emo's Not Dead merch, and you can also have me review your music, artwork, or anything else. All you need to do is join my Patreon at the $10 level, and then every month I do a call for submissions. If you want me to review something, just drop it in the comments of that post, and then I will review it live on Twitch. So if any of that sounds cool to you, hit the link in the description of this video, and I appreciate your support. In no particular order, I just kind of grabbed some. One from a long time ago, from back a year before I was born. God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols.
You really lost, didn't you? But you were wrong, old bean, because we're back with a vengeance.
God save the Queen, my son.
Kind of interesting. So this came out back in 1977. And back then, I think we had a very different, and the song was called God Save the Queen, which was obviously, you know, spoiler warning, people. Spoiler warning, they did not actually want to save the queen. I know that may be hard to believe, but they did not mean what they said. In fact, they meant the opposite of what they said. I know. Hard to believe. So this is a big deal. I don't really know how people felt about the royals back in the late 70s, but I would imagine that they probably, you know, liked them a lot more than they do now, since the royals basically just completely flushed their reputation down their toilet in the past couple years. My understanding is that back then this is a pretty big deal. So, you know, showing the queen with a safety pin through her nose, stuff like that back then, that was a big deal. For the release of this song, they played it on a boat going down like the Thames River or whatever outside Buckingham Palace while the queen was celebrating Jubilee. I don't know what that is, but she was celebrating some sort of special day, and they played this song on a boat outside the palace, and they got arrested for it. I have a hard time thinking that that would happen now, but, you know, they weren't the first punk band, but they were the first punk band to kind of really break through into the mainstream, and people were very, very, very shocked by it. That's a lie. He said, God save the queen. We mean it, man. They did not, in fact, mean it. That was a lie. But yeah, I mean, I think this song was very shocking at the time. By today's standards, you know, this is pretty tame. But again, this was 45 years ago. And to this day, I would say, you know, if you look at punks now, they look and act and sound like this video, right? So, you know, I guess the consensus opinion now is that the Sex Pistols sucked, and they were industry plants, and they were a boy band, and they had no talent, blah, blah, blah. I completely disagree. I think the album is amazing. Punk rockers like to rag on the Pistols now, but they were a nuclear bomb to the music scene back then. I think for anybody that values the ability to talk shit about public figures and authority figures, I'm not going to say the Sex Pistols were the first ones or the only ones to do it, but I think they were among the very first to do it in such a just totally blatant, completely disrespectful way that at the time was not acceptable, obviously, because I got arrested for doing it. Yeah, this album's almost 50 years old. The fact that they got arrested for doing this, I think, tells you a lot. In hindsight, of course, I can completely understand why it was controversial. I mean, I think the Sex Pistols are great. And I say hats off to them because, yeah, obviously they were kind of like edgy, a little bit edgelords. But, they basically paved the way for everybody else to be able to do that. One example would be the next song, which is American Idiot by Green Day. In a way, I would consider American Idiot to be sort of the update to the Sex Pistols almost, because if you were 12 when this came out, then you don't really know who the Sex Pistols were, but you probably liked Green Day, or at least, that Green Day might have been the first punk band that you heard. And if you listen to this, it's pretty goddamn punk. It's pretty goddamn punk. Right? I mean, this just sounds like a straight up punk album. And again, this may not seem particularly, edgy or controversial by today's standards, but again, this was 20 years ago. This was like when we were balls deep in the second Iraq War. And at the time, it was not really considered acceptable to speak out against it. Like, if you remember the Dixie Chicks, basically, they were one of the first bands to get canceled because they were like very mildly critical of Bush. I forget exactly what they said, but Dixie Chicks said something that was like very mildly critical of Bush. And the entire country music industry just completely turned on them and blacklisted them. And like, I think to this day, they're still not nearly as big as they would have been back then. Now, obviously, that's less true of Green Day being a rock band and specifically like a punk band. They probably didn't really quite, have the same kind of level of scrutiny that Dixie Chicks did. But I mean, this was a ballsy thing to do for a band back then. I think that the album was also great. I mean, I made a whole video about it, but I think it's like a masterpiece. But yeah, I mean, it was definitely controversial at the time. And, the fact that he said the F word in the song, the F slur that rhymes with maggot, definitely shocking. But interestingly, that's the part that I thought would upset people, and I don't remember that it did. As far as I recall back then, people understood that he was speaking, he was saying, oh, you want to call me the F word? Okay, I'm the F word, which is, kind of surprising that people didn't get bent out of shape about that part. But they did get bent out of shape about them just sort of being critical of the establishment, because again, back in the 2000s, yes, on March 10, 2003, when Natalie Maines said she was ashamed to be from the same state as then U.S. President George W. Bush, from the stage in London just before the Iraq War, everything changed for the Chicks. Yeah, I mean, it was a different time, and people were really fired up about this stuff. Like, again, this was only 2 years after 9/11, and it was really not acceptable to like speak out against authority figures the way that it is now. So these days, I think it would be a total non-event. I don't think this would even be interesting if this song came out today. But it was very controversial back then. And again, I say hats off to them for, for anybody that's sort of willing to kind of put their ass in line like that. Here's an interesting one. Some of you may be too young to remember this, but sadly, I am not too young to remember this. Like a Prayer by Madonna from 89 or 90. I forget which. But this is interesting. So we got a burning cross.
Life is a mystery.
Years later, I realized the song wasn't about praying. I remember the outrage. I was in Catholic school at the time, and boy, oh boy, were the priests and nuns all aflutter with outrage. Oh, interesting. We don't have Catholic school around here. So there's a few things that were like people were upset about with this song. The main thing is that they made Jesus black, which again, these days would be just completely like not noteworthy at all. But back then to make Jesus black was most definitely a big deal. It's hard to imagine this, but as recently as 1989, having like black people in roles like this was controversial, which is just, it's so bizarre, but it was really not that long ago, but it was like a different world. And then also there's these allegories. I don't remember what this part's about. I think that it's some sort of references to like Jim Crow kind of era. So this guy gets blamed for this crime he didn't do and thrown in jail. They've got these crosses burning, stuff like that. And again, yeah, this is kind of another example of where the polarity is flipped. Nowadays, it's controversial to be a Christian. It's really interesting, isn't it? The idea that in 1989, having like a black Jesus and sort of engaging in blasphemy back then, what the church perceived to be blasphemy, was incredibly controversial. And obviously she knew what she was doing. She was fucking with them on purpose, but, you know, as she should. I mean, I understand that this stuff is sacred to a lot of people, but it's not sacred to me, and it's not sacred to her. You know, you don't have a right to have other people respect your religious iconography. You know what I mean? I can imagine that images of her dancing in a spaghetti strap dress in front of burning crosses would have infuriated people. I can't imagine people would care now. This was a really, really, really big deal. Probably for all of those reasons. You know, it's a mixed race couple. Jesus is black. It's all of these things put together. And again, you know, I was in 6th grade when this came out, not that long ago. Things can change. Things can change fast. The controversy helped get her music and video spread so quickly, so win-win. Yeah, I mean, she was the master of that. She was so good at using controversy to market herself over and over and over and over. She did it a bunch of other times. Flipping the script a little bit, more recently here, the most offensive song of this year, Try That in a Small Town by Jason Aldean. You guys remember this one? Dad's rocking out in front of the courthouse.
Sucker punch somebody on a sidewalk, carjacking old lady at a red light. You think it's cool, act a fool if you like.
What's the lines? Like, carjack an old lady, pull a gun on someone at a stoplight, try that in a small town, is, you know, so basically, and there's all the images of like people who are supposed to be Antifa or like protesters or rioters, whatever it is. So this is sort of an interesting one, where the other examples that we looked at were like pearl clutching from the right, from like Christian conservatives who got upset. And now the tables have turned, and being a patriotic American is the shocking thing to do. And everyone said that this song was racist and this, that, and the other. I don't think it's racist. I think it's kind of cringe and dumb because it's like this guy trying to act like he's a badass and, you know, try that in a small town. It's like, dude, you play guitar. Are you the Punisher? You're not the Punisher. This song went to #1 solely because of the Streisand effect. Yeah, I think it's exactly the same thing as Madonna and some of those other examples where the controversy is exactly what made this thing so successful. It's also not very brave to release it 3 years after the protest. That's true too. So my thought on this is like, people getting upset about this and calling it racist to me is no different than people getting their fucking panties in a bunch years ago because of American Idiot or the Sex Pistols. It's like, this is really not that big of a deal. I guess the controversy was the building they filmed in front of was a Deep South courthouse in extremely deadly and racist history. I can't imagine that he did that on purpose. Like, do you really think that Jason Aldean is like a student of history enough to know that in 1935, you know, someone did this racist thing at that courthouse? I can't imagine he is. Now, it's possible, but I think it's probably just like whoever directed the video was like, oh, I got a film permit and we can use this courthouse. Yeah, I doubt Jason is a student of much. Exactly. So I think that's a bit of a reach. To me, this is an example of pearl clutching on the other side. It's like all you do when you make a fuss about things that shouldn't be a fuss, all you do is make yourself look dumb and draw more attention to something that really didn't need to be a big deal. That's what I think. So, you know, if someone actually writes a song that is racist, by all means, call it out. Okay? But it's a pretty big stretch to call this racist, I think. I think people need to just like calm down with the pearl clutching. That's what I think. A song that got a lot of pearl clutching back in the day was Cop Killer by Body Count.
It's dedicated to some personal friends of mine, the LAPD. I'd like to take a pig out here in this parking lot and shoot them in their motherfucking face. Cop Killer!
So this came out in 91, I think, maybe 92. And it was a big deal, like a really, really, really big deal. Like Charlton Heston was on TV talking about it. George Bush was the president at the time, and he was talking about it. There was like a call for a nationwide boycott on this. They wanted people to pull it off the shelves. This is Entertainment Tonight, you know, and it was like a big, big, big deal.
Controversial song, Cop Killer. But an exclusive Entertainment Tonight Us magazine poll finds the public does not want to participate. Police across...
I mean, so like he has that line, I know your family's grieving, fuck them, which is kind of funny.
The nation are demanding that Ice-T's song Cop Killer be pulled from store shelves. But in our exclusive Entertainment Tonight Us magazine poll, the public is less upset by the controversial record. When we asked people to describe their reaction to the lyrics, I'm about to dust off some cops, die, 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 pig, die.
Die, 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 pig, die. So it was a pretty big deal. It was interesting for me because my dad was a corrections officer, so not exactly a cop, but pretty much. My stepmom also worked in a prison. She was not a corrections officer. She had a different job there, but she worked at a prison. My aunt worked at the county courthouse, and my cousin works in corrections as well. So basically like half my family works in corrections. Several of my other family members went to prison. So I kind of saw things from both sides of it. And I actually saw a body count with my dad at Lollapalooza 1, I think in 1991. We both liked Ice-T. We saw Ice-T play this song, at Lollapalooza when it came out. So it was kind of interesting to me. And I remember asking him about this. Like, what's this all about? Why are they so upset? And he explained, police brutality being an issue to me. And my dad's job, we had a few different jobs when he was a corrections officer, but one of his jobs was to do investigations. So if an inmate alleged that he got beat up by an officer, my dad would do the investigation and figure out what happened. Did the cop do something wrong, or was it the inmate or whatever? So, he was actually directly involved with this kind of stuff. Now, my personal point of view on this is that it's pretty stupid. I think it's just not helpful to write a song about killing cops. I think it's just dumb. I think Ice-T is a smart guy, and I understand that what he was doing was potentially necessary to get people to pay attention to this topic. But yeah, lazy songwriting, it's just stupid, I think. It's tough to say, though, because on the other hand, nobody cared about this stuff until Ice-T and NWA talked about it. At least, mainstream white Americans didn't care about it and didn't talk about it and didn't think about it. So on the one hand, it's kind of stupid and edgy. On the other hand, if they didn't say something about it, maybe nobody would know about it. You know what I mean? I kind of take it personally, knowing that my family members, are in theory the people he's talking about, but they're good people. Exactly. It really hadn't been talked about like this before. So as much as I kind of roll my eyes at it and I think it's kind of dumb and I'm kind of personally offended by it, on the other hand, I'm well, maybe it needed to be said. You know what I mean? Maybe it needed to be said. Of course, he didn't mean it to be directed at all cops. He's talked about that pretty frequently, and I don't think he's like that at all. But yeah, kind of an interesting one where I think the pearl clutching was justified, because he's talking about killing cops and in a very, he said, I know your family's grieving, fuck them. That's a very cold-blooded, unnuanced way of talking about it. And yet at the same time, police brutality certainly was a big issue at the time, and him and NWA definitely did draw attention to it. So, can we say that it was wrong? I don't know. It's legitimate. I would be very interested to talk to him about it. It's legitimately kind of a nuanced topic. So that does it for the most controversial songs of all time. Join us next time for another edition of this where we can clutch our pearls and get angry about things that are not actually that big of a deal in episode number 2. Spoiler warning, they did not actually want to save the Queen.